really the protest with Dianne Feinstein yesterday. I mean, we mentioned it, and it is it's garnering perhaps maybe a little more attention than people would have anticipated. But it is, I think, it clearly is indicative of something that has struck a nerve, and because as we get closer to the potential of defeating Donald Trump and perhaps taking the Senate in 2020, climate change is going to reemerge as an issue that we can actually do something about. To some extent, it goes away climate change itself does not. The urgency does not. Obviously, it grows with time. It's less of a focus when there's a sense that you have completely controlled Republican government, because they will do nothing about it. Not just do nothing about it. They will actively fight against the reality of it. And as we get, now that we have a democratically controlled House, that's why that debate begins to heat up. And that's why it becomes largely an internal Democratic debate, because the Republicans are immovable on that accord. And ultimately, to the extent that climate change is going to be addressed in a timely fashion, they're going to have to be irrelevant to the equation. So the argument becomes between people in the Democratic Party, essentially, who will hopefully have a hold of levers of power, and how seriously they will take this. And that's why pushing Dianne Feinstein to swing for the fences, when we already know that there's not going to be any runs scored until Democrats take control. She's up there saying, look, what we're going to do is we're going to try for a single, because I've been here for 30 years and I know the best we can do is a single. But the fact of the matter is, it's not going to mean anything either way. Everything we're doing now about climate change, every argument we're having about climate change, is for what can be done when Democrats take control. So when Dianne Feinstein says, like, I can get something passed, it's irrelevant anyways. Passing something with the Republicans today is irrelevant. The Interior Department just rolled back 1,700 or provided 1,700 waivers for safety regulations following the BP disaster. There's no part of the Trump administration or the Republican governance that is going to actively engage in climate change. So the places to fight about this are within the Democratic Party. And I guess also on The View, where Meghan McCain has a really interesting take on this. I want you to just, before you hear her take on this, I'm just going to say her name to you, and I want you to think about that. Her name is Meghan McCain.
What the hell? I love Dianne Feinstein now. I loved everything about it, and I'm in the minority on this. I really hate when people use children as political props in general. What I thought of, thank you very much, is that there was a kid named Jonathan Crone who spoke at CPAC in 2009, and he was like the new young conservative voice, and he made cable appearances, and later on as an adult he said he was naive. He was just saying the stuff he had heard for a long time. He also said, I shouldn't have done that speech. It was a bad idea. Later on as an adult, and I think children have to be able to grow up and make their own political decisions about what they want. And anyone shaming Dianne Feinstein, she has been doing this 30 years. And if you don't like it, she also said in that, I won by a 1 million vote margin. I don't agree with her politically, but she makes a lot of good points.
She's talking about basically the things you have to go through. But, you know, I would make just one point about this, because years ago during the AIDS crisis, Larry Kramer was on my show. He was the person who did ACT UP and really went after people about AIDS, medical help, etc.
Is he a child?
No, he was a grown-up, Larry Kramer. He's a famous activist. And he was going after Elizabeth Taylor. Now, Elizabeth Taylor was a pro-activist. Yeah. She was one of the champions in the AIDS crisis, and he was going after her. And I said, why are you picking on her? And he said, because if I go after the antis, nothing gets done. I can at least make a dent when I'm talking to someone on our side. And Dianne Feinstein has an incredible record on climate change. Yeah. So yes, go to her, because if you go to that guy Inhofe, who's holding a snowball and thinks that makes the point about global climate change, you're going to get nothing out of it. And Trump, same thing.
I actually think that kids today know a lot about climate change, and they are the ones that are going to be directly affected by it. My kids know a lot about climate change. They know a lot about recycling, and I think you give them short shrift if you say, you know what, they don't know enough, they should keep their mouth shut. I think my daughter Paloma is 12 years old, and she could give Dianne Feinstein a list of reasons why she should vote.
And they're the ones who are going to be affected.
I don't know that they're necessarily being used as props, and I don't like the way that she engaged with them.
Well, I've been on the other end of it, as has Abby, and this is a common cheap trick. Using a kid as a prop, I never like it. I never have.
It did fit.
Yeah. Yeah. So in other words, the two people who are sitting at that table because their dads were
I was going
politicians.
to say, and with that, I would like to announce that I'm leaving The View.
Right, exactly. I know Jonathan Crone. We had him on the show, actually, back 4 or 5 years ago.
A couple of months before I started, and I remember going through the archives and being like, well, that's one of the more bizarre interviews, but it was actually
I remember
great.
talking about him on Break Room Live and mocking him. And I think the problem that Meghan is having is that she's finding out that on the right, they use the kids as props. And, you know, kids are used as props in all sorts of contexts. But in this instance, these kids, it really is their future. And you don't need to be a scientist to make the case that we have a urgent need to address climate change, because the overwhelming number of scientists who study this stuff have made that case. So you can just simply rely on the 97% of scientists who weigh in on this, and you don't need to be a scientist yourself. And Dianne Feinstein has probably done no more reading than I would imagine some of the parents who were with those kids about this stuff.
Definitely. And it's also just such a, I'll be on brand for a second, and I'll mention South Africa. There's a thing in, there's the ANC Youth League, right? Like the civil rights movement was powered by, teenage and younger activists. So like, it's very funny that the conception
she's just
is
being
either,
disingenuous. I mean,
she's
honestly,
being totally, but more broadly, there's an important point here too, that like, not only is young people in politics not a prop necessarily, it's actually powered some extremely significant things, and it's going to need to on this, because they're literally like, we are to a much higher degree than Dianne Feinstein, and if you're 14 to a higher degree than us, live on this planet that's being made uninhabitable.
Say that about the Parkland
well, right.
students?
That's another great
not.
example.
Of course not.
Right.
I mean, so these kids were like 5 to 6 years younger. But the issue is the message they was bringing is fairly straightforward. And so Meghan McCain may have issues with the way that she was used as a prop at different times, which perfectly legitimate. She should write another book about it. But
I would love to read that book.
Good for Joy Behar too, for making the point that you protest people you have leverage with. There may be some modicum of value to protest people you have no leverage with, but it is really just more for your own well-being and to make yourself feel good. But you protest on issues where you want legislation with legislators who, on some level at least, are within the ballpark of needing to listen to you.
And all of the things
or are supposed to at least pretend that they have to listen to you, right?
Well, I mean, Dianne Feinstein did not like to be in that situation. Even if she's not gonna run for re-election or whatnot, but the bottom line is she feels some pressure from that, because somewhere in her social circle, somewhere in her political operation, there are people who are susceptible to that type of pressure. And if she wasn't, she would have just locked the door and not had them come in at all.
Yeah.
And so they feel the pressure certainly more from than had they gone down to Jane Inhofe's office. Definitely. And there's a certain amount of some psychology in it. Otherwise, she just, Dianne Feinstein can't possibly be like, I just got to watch my back as a re-election.
Dianne Feinstein also, in the ways where everybody's sort of praising her for breaking down supposedly how the world works to these kids, is indicting why the world as it is constituted does not work.
I've been here for 30
years
and we've done nothing on this.
Incredible. That is the most extra. And I do have to say, this is a pernicious problem with Democratic Party leaders, because unfortunately Republicans have accomplished a lot, for destruction. But you have all of these Democrats running around saying, I've worked on this for decades. Well, okay, well, let me apply a little market logic to that.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, think about your life. Think about your choices.